Well, I can see you have good taste. This is the one.
I'm just here to make sure you don't shake his hand and take his fingers.
I'd love to hear this.
I don't know if I feel you full of any more confidence, you'll burst.
This whole concept is deep.
It's abstract expressionist. What the hell does that mean?
It must mean something.
Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're just supposed to experience it.
We want to find things for ourselves. We want to feel.
Celebrities make me shy.
Pull back the curtain and take your seat.
Welcome to Mad Men Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015. We gear our conversation around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and of course, having some wine with your spaghetti. What else would you have? Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. John, you don't need a co-host. You're 32 years old. But there is somebody I have to introduce here. But, normally I say his name and with a little pithy comment. But instead, I want his introduction to be more of a feeling, a mood. So here we go. Okay. Will Ashton, exotic dude. That's right. It's Will Ashton, the exotic dude.
What up? It's me. I'm back.
That wasn't a jingle. That was a song.
Yeah, there you go. It's a feeling.
Mike couldn't make it this week because he had to go pee and just disappeared into the park. And then Will and I had to, of course, not pick up our trash. We had to get out of there quick.
Yeah, I was perturbed. I was disturbed.
I thought you said betrothed.
No, I was disturbed. I was infuriated by their littering habits. Like Don throwing that beer can, like bad, but it's like whatever. He was being a man. Betty
that's like how the people were back then, man.
Sure, I'm not saying. Yeah, that's it's reflecting the times. I get that. It's just still like, man, just could not give a dang or a heck about littering.
Now, Will, on that topic, I have just one question. Are we rich?
I'm certainly not rich. I can't speak for you.
Well, that's the central question of this week's episode, isn't it? The Gold Violin, an episode about materialism and possessions and whatnot.
I'm rich in your company. I guess I can say that.
Well, so that's nice of you to say, even though it's incorrect. So this week we're talking about the Gold Violin. We're on season 2, episode 7. And this episode aired in September 7th, 2008. Look at that. 14 years later, we're still talking about this show. How about that? Now, this episode was directed by Andrew Bernstein, who did... It's so funny because So the last episode Andrew Bernstein directed was Flight 1. But before that, he directed Babylon, which is a movie that you saw last night, also called Babylon.
Yes.
He directed, sorry, I'm talking all over the place.
Sure.
He directed the episode of Mad Men, Babylon.
Right.
He did not direct the movie Babylon, directed by Damien Chazelle.
Right. Yeah, Damien Chazelle is the filmmaker behind Babylon, a film that you and I have seen quite recently.
That's right. And so Bernstein has returned for, I believe this is his 3rd episode now. And I think you liked Flight 1, last episode he did in season 2.
Yeah, that was, I think, one of my favorites from the season so far. And I'm disappointed that's the one episode so far this season I wasn't able to discuss.
That's right. Now, this episode has a lot of writers attached to it. You might have noticed in the opening credits, you have Jane Anderson, Andre Jacques Menton, Maria Jacques Menton, and Matthew Weiner. And so they're all, of course, Jane Anderson, I don't think we've seen an episode written by them yet. But everyone else here, Andre Jacques Menton and Maria Jacques Menton, they are, of course, longtime writers of the show, along with, obviously, Matthew Weiner. I think this is Jane Anderson's first time writing an episode, and I think the only episode they write this season, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, The Gold Violin.
Mm-hmm.
This one of the higher rated episodes of season 2 in terms of viewership. It's like at the upper tier. It's not the highest rated, but it's up there. And it's also considered by some people to be one of the best episodes of the whole season. A lot of people look at the season as a whole. A lot of people, like more in the Weiner camp, are like Maidenform's the best one. Other people are like, nah, it's the Gold Violin. And then you have a few other people who would take like Mountain King, I think, or Meditations in an Emergency, which are the ones toward the end of the season. For my money, I think Gold Violin is a really good episode. What do you think, though?
Yeah, no, I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, I know before I watched it, you were saying that I was going to enjoy this episode, presumably because it's so Sal-centric.
Well, it's a great episode for both of us because it's Sal-centric and it's Ken-centric.
That's true,
right?
yeah. It's your favorite character and my favorite character having a will they, won't they?
Will they, won't they, could they, should they eat some spaghetti, if you catch my meaning.
Share some sauce if you catch my drift.
Yeah, well, there's some contention about this because I know that I think Weiner and the actor who plays Sal, I think his name is Brett Blatt. Brett.
Yeah.
I always mess up his name. I apologize.
I think
Brian
quite.
Batt.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I think he's quite good on the show. I don't think he gets enough credit for his performance. I feel it's so intricate and so like thoughtful in how it's presented, and like I think even in the Mad Men Carousel book they kind of break this down a little bit in a way that I was glad to see, where it's like it's such a thoughtful performance in a way that like as good as these scripts are, I feel like he brings so much to that character that kind of makes him feel a little bit more fleshed out, and I think that's so central to why I think he's such a fascinating character, and I feel the show is it's missing so many opportunities to make him a contemporary for Don Draper, in the sense that like they're both men that have to kind of present themselves in a certain way, have to kind of hide a key part of their identity, feel that they're not quite among the people that they socialize with and work with, but also in this case, like I feel like Sal is at once like more confident in himself and even less confident in himself as far as like who he can be and who he is. And I just find that I think in this episode it really plays out in a kind of melancholic and kind of bittersweet way. But I really like what he brings to that performance in this episode and any episode with him, really.
Well, sure, he's more confident. He has Kitty, right? And Kitty is a character who his marriage to her he can use as a suit to dress up in, very similar to the skin that Don wears. Like I guess to what you're implying, right?
Do you mean like a beard? Like that Kitty's his beard? Is that what you're implying?
No, the idea of like how Don uses his suit, he uses the car. Like a lot of characters, they use possessions in order to mask who they really are. That's the main theme of this episode, right? Don feels that if he gets the Cadillac, right, that it's going to propel him into the upper echelon of society, and people aren't going to really see him for who he really is. That's why the episode starts with somebody coming up to him in that flashback, which I'm curious what you thought of, and is like, you're not really Don Draper. That's what haunts him, is that somebody's going to see who he really is. So he has to constantly use wealth and status and power to hide that. And that is what Sal is doing with Kitty. He is using the facade of this marriage, somebody he clearly genuinely cares about, in order to hide his true feelings. And so that to me is like what makes his character really compelling, as to what you're saying, not the inverse of Don at all, but really just a parallel to Don's story. You see the similarities between them, and you see the contrast in ways that are really compelling. That's why a lot of people say the thing that makes Mad Men such an enduring show, one that maintained its popularity over time, is that you really care about the secondary characters or even tertiary characters, sometimes as much as you do the main characters. And that's, I think, the secret sauce to this show. Will, would you say?
Indeed, that is the secret sauce. Sal's secret sauce, as my screen name has been for this episode.
Sal's special sauce. Yeah.
Sorry,
no, his secret sauce. The secret's not out quite yet.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to discuss here. And you were asking me about my feelings on that flashback you were saying?
Well, before that, I got to confess something to you, Will. I got to confess something here.
Oh,
so a big thing in this episode is the Rothko, right? They go into the office to get a sneak peek at the painting and everything. Yeah. And there's this moment where Ken and Sal are looking at it, and Ken kind of nails the appeal of abstract expressionism, right? Which is, you're not really supposed to explain it. There's no brochure that you can read,
Right.
It's a feeling, right? And when I was watching this episode for the first time, like you know how I like to do this show. I mean, I like to watch these episodes, especially in maiden form, and I just like to keep pausing it and taking down notes, right? And then after the episode's over, I start reading a bunch of stuff about it, and I start researching every little thing because that's fun for me. But I decided to do something a little different just for this episode, something a little different, and I didn't take any notes. I just experienced it. I just experienced the episode. So there'll probably be a bunch of things. There were things that, like, I was watching the episode and I was like, oh, I hope I remember to bring that up. And, I'm sure some things will fall through the cracks. But yeah, I didn't read Mad Men Carousel this week. So you're on your own there, Will. You'll be able to lie, actually, about like things being your idea versus, Matt Zoller's sites. So have fun with that.
Okay.
I know you would never do that for real, of course.
No, yeah, but I was wondering, and it was one of the main things I wanted to ask you, so I'm glad you kind of got the ball rolling here. I'm assuming that whole conversation related to painting is kind of similar to Matt Weiner's relationship to the show and how he kind of sees what he wants his audience to take away from it. Do you think that's true, or do you think there's some extra layers to that?
I think that's valid because that is a consistent theme in this episode is how Weiner seems to view the rational, self-interested person being different from the genuine artist. We've talked about this a bunch in the show. There was the episode with the Belle Jolie lipsticks experiment, right? Where Peggy comes up with a basket of kisses. And we talked about how she's able to separate herself as an artist because she is an observer. She's able to observe what others are doing and just sort of experience things rather than being a participant in the consumerism of it all. And that is what kind of makes her an artist. That kind of echoes into this episode. This episode also echoes a lot, by the way, for those who think young. Lots of direct connections because Martinson's Coffee was brought up in that first episode. We see that Duck has been laying the groundwork for this pitch for a long time. They hired Kurt and Schmitty, right, to come back. Don hired them in the first episode, kind of as freelancers, I think, and then now they're coming back, of course, to do their whole thing. They've been working on this for a while. But to what you're saying, the Rothko scene is so key in analyzing the difference between an artist, like somebody who has something honest to say. So that's striking back to the episode where Ken, right, wrote the short story that was 5G. And it was referenced in this episode when he's talking to Sal. And Sal brings up that short story that people were jealous, the one about maple syrup, whatever. And in that Rothko scene, we see the different types of people who watch a TV show or listen to a song or experience anything that is artistic or creative. You have the person who's running around looking for the brochure, which is Harry Crane. And you have the person who is just sort of like, doesn't get it. It's like, oh, smudgy squares. That's interesting. So that's Jane. And then you have, the person who doesn't engage with it at all, which is Paul, right? Who's not willing to take the risk. You have Dale. We don't even see Dale. I thought Dale was fired. I forgot Dale was like even a thing. He's the kind of character, he's one of the writers, but we never see him. He just shows up, I think once or twice in season 1, shows up again in season 2 in the first episode, and then that's it. We hear about him though in this episode, and he's neither an artist or a kind of like numbers guy like Harry. He's just like a fraud, basically. I mean, I don't know if you're a Dale supporter, but yeah, I think he kind of sucks. But yeah, no. And then last you have Sal and Ken. You have 2 actual artists. And I think that's where their companionship, their genuine connection comes from. The fact that there's no ego in it. There's no sort of, they're trying to get one up on the other person. They are experiencing something together. And Sal kind of looks at it and he's just trying to find the meaning of it. He's not trying to shortcut it. He's an artist. Like, he just wants to understand a different artist. And then you have Ken, who is able to just hit the nail on the head and have that dialogue with Sal. It kind of reminds me of the Mad Men podcast, the Cinemaholics podcast, where it's just 2 guys just trying to figure out what's going on with this thing we just watched. Yeah, no, I think that's super intentional on Matthew Weiner's part.
Yeah, it's easy for me to, in a sense, kind of compare it to something like Sopranos, which obviously we've said before, Weiner worked on that show. And that's a show where, especially in the later seasons, when Weiner came into it, it's meant to be a very sort of like cerebral and psychosis-based show where I think, it is supposed to be kind of analoged and kind of dissected in many ways, but you're also supposed to kind of experience it and let the feelings of it just kind of come through. But as far as like you were talking about your process, for me, I'm very much, especially because I'm watching this for the first time, I'm just like watching it, experience it as it happens, and then I kind of go back and I'm like, okay, reading about it, like, okay, what is this really saying? Like, what are people's interpretation of these events? How is that happening? Especially with, Zoller Seiss's book. That's something I find very key to my enjoyment of the show. And also, obviously, with our conversations on this podcast, we can kind of have a dissection of these and kind of grow to appreciate an episode like we did last week, or kind of have some more critical things to say about, or just kind of appreciate what's going on here and what he's trying to say. But yeah, I think it's, I don't know, I think there is something to be said about how with that painting, he is kind of looking at the show from now on the second season and allowing himself to be like, okay, like obviously he has like these very lofty critical things to say, but I think there is a part of him that's also kind of wondering, like, you're also supposed to be very like evoked by this. So you're supposed to kind of just feel it before you're thinking about it. And I feel like that's something that like the other characters in the office, when they're seeing the pain, they're so caught up in like trying to like figure out what it is. Whereas Ken's just like feeling it and letting the words kind of come out. And I think that's so crucial to like what I think Weiner wants the show to be. And I think also that's something that Sal can really appreciate and grow to appreciate with Ken's company.
I'm just glad that when we opened the show, I was worried that we were going to get to the part where I ask you, Will, what did you think of the episode? How did it strike you? I'm glad you didn't respond, no one's ever asked me that before. Probably because it's none of their business.
That would have been a great way to do this episode, and then just have like white noise for like
just play this out
57 minutes or whatever. But oh well.
Lots of good Bert Cooper moments in this episode. I like the part where he goes like whirly gigs and all. It's a good episode for him. But he of course is somebody who is similar to Don. As this is episode, it evokes the episode from season 1. I forget which one exactly it was. Might have been Babylon, where he tells Don, yes, it was Babylon, because that's the one where he gives Don the bonus, and he tells him that we're very alike, you and I. Oh, no, was it Hobo Code?
Oh, no, I think it was Babylon, but I could be wrong. I just was going to say, speaking of Babylon.
It was Hobo Code, actually.
Oh,
because Hobo Code's the one where he gets the bonus and then gives it to Midge.
Well, speaking of Babylon, I just got a notification on my phone via the AMC app that I can buy tickets now for Babylon.
But Will, you already saw Babylon on the big screen. Are you going to watch it again?
Yeah.
No, okay.
No, actually, well, now you mention, I don't know, because I got to see it in Dolby. I know you watched it via a DVD screener, so I am very curious.
Digital screener.
Well, excuse me, Your Majesty. Yeah, no, I'll definitely want to discuss that more when we talk about that on Cinemaholics, but that's on
I always say
or
that
time.
because digital tends to be higher quality. Jeez Louise. And I know you were giving me a bunch of gruff for watching it on like, a key fob. It's, the Shrek TV or whatever. But anyway, yeah, no, like I was saying before, Bert Cooper, he's the Ayn Rand type. The objectivist, the person who is really only in it for himself. And as we find out, his main motivation for getting this Rothko is twofold. He wants to gauge the different people in the office, namely the creatives, right? He brings in writers and so forth. With Harry Crane, he just wanted to talk about the TV department. And I think this is our first time where we see Cooper even recognizing the TV department, even though it was discussed in the episode The Benefactor that Cooper apparently was impressed by Harry Crane making himself or, having a little bit more initiative. And that's why he gets the meeting with Roger, right? So Cooper seems to see himself a little bit in Harry Crane, similar to Don. So I think we're getting the hint a little bit that Bert is looking at, okay, this is our Don Draper for media. That's always been my interpretation, because I think Harry Crane very much is sort of like a sweatier version of Don. He's probably the version of Don closer to his first bout in advertising, where he's just trying to get ahead. He's trying to find the angle and everything and trying to make sure people like him. The Don we see now is very different, has that mystique. But I think that there is a little bit of like, there have been some Don and Harry moments where the two have, I think, genuinely bonded.
Well, I mean, we did see a little bit of that early Don, like pre him being the Don we know in this flashback.
Yeah,
And
not a good
he's like,
salesman back then.
well, I mean, he's not
Why
quite
don't you just
sweaty.
sit in it?
Yeah, I mean, he's not quite as sweaty, I guess, as Harry, but like he is a little less like cocksure, like kind of like, you know, eager to please, but like kind of recognizing that he's selling basically what seems to be like a lemon of a car. And
Well,
just
the first scene is where he's with Wayne Kirby, right? And Wayne Kirby, played by the actor from Breaking Bad and plenty of other things.
Oh yeah, Elliot Schwartz.
Yes,
Himself. Yes. Yeah.
Great cameo. And I think Don sees Wayne Kirby and is like, this is the person I am today. But he might be like, that's why he reflects back on like the person he used to be. And I think that he's a little unsettled by the fact that Wayne Kirby sells cars the way he sells advertising, if you think.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly true. But I think there's also like just that inherent fear that Don, I mean, is always going to feel sort of inferior to who he is supposed to be. And that's kind of caked in this episode, this idea of like, he's an imposter walking among these professionals and like having this vivid flashback where it was one of the few times where like one of his worst fears were realized, that someone called him out. Like, he's not Don Draper. He's an imposter. He has like that kind of deep seeped imposter syndrome throughout this episode. And, you know, I think that's probably part of the main reason why those kids came back, because it's like he's like trying to sell coffee to a new generation, and he's just like, kids today don't drink coffee, which is such a kind of odd thing to say thinking about the today and the now. But yeah, this idea that like he's like not really sure how to connect with children, how to make them feel like that this is a product they should consume. And yeah, and then also obviously with this idea that he's getting pushed into this like elite class, you know, with this new folk museum and things like that, and buying this car they feel he doesn't quite deserve, doesn't quite have the status for, even though he's pretty well off, we can tell economically at this point. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, just that's kind of, you know, pushing Don through this episode. And obviously he gets called out at the end, albeit not for being an imposter, but rather for, you know, his nefarious deeds with Jimmy. But I
think it's all of a piece, though.
Yeah.
I think that what happens in the end of the episode, I think that's what makes this episode good. It all ties together, I think, very elegantly, because when you really look at what Don did in that affair, he treated that affair with like Bobby and Betty are his possessions. They're his gateways to power. I think there's a lot of this episode saying that, like, when Bert has that line, philanthropy is the gateway to power. I think Don connects something like philanthropy with the good sexy times, and he was able to create that opportunity for Jimmy Barrett, and he got something out of it. It was literally philanthropy, wasn't it? And in that sense, the disgusting person he is inside still came out. And I think that's what another thing that this episode layers in really well is how his hunt for status is so tied into every single person in this episode trying to achieve something, trying to win out over others using materialism. And every piece of this episode ties into it. Even a lot of the ad stuff that happens in this episode, there's a lot of advertising in this episode, which is funny to say for a show like Mad Men. But sometimes we get episodes of Mad Men where we barely have any advertising pitches or talks about what are we going to do. In this episode, we get only a little bit of Peggy, no Pete. But the one major scene we get with Peggy is the Pampers scene, right? And there, even just that one little scene about Pampers and like switching from reusable diapers, right, to diapers that you just throw away, tying into the litter thing later, it just only adds and compounds to what this episode is getting at, of people for the price of convenience. You know, they'll pollute, you know, they will spend more money, 10 cents a piece, as Sal says, because it gets them something, right?
Yeah. I honestly kind of forgot about the diaper thing until you brought it back up, but I'm glad you did, yeah, because I love Sal's this little pithy line there where he's just like, 10 cents a piece, they try to find a way to reuse it or something. I can't remember exactly what the line is, but it was a great Sal line.
You'd want to reuse them at 10 cents a piece. But, and of course, the name of the episode, the Gold Violin. The Gold Violin, where Ken says, like, what is it? It's perfect in every way, except it couldn't make music. And that to me is like, it sums up the episode. It's like, it's something you can buy, but what does it really get you? You know, like Jimmy says at the end of the episode, you know, what did you get? right? Bobby, like plenty of people had that, whatever. And so it kind of likens how to some of these people, these possessions are just a means to an end, and like the lighter, where Sal has the lighter from Ken. That was another thing I thought about opening the episode. Where I was like, oh, hey, Will, I'm missing my lighter that I left at your house the other day. I almost started it with that. That would have been fun. But
you don't think Don is also sort of like a golden violin in that sense? Like he is like adopts the image. He's everything like people want from him, like as far as like the aesthetics as a husband, as an ad executive and all this stuff, but he doesn't allow himself to be open emotionally. So therefore he can't really like give himself, because he's afraid of showing his true self and being revealed as an imposter. And so like there's like part of him that's like always going to be withholding something, and therefore can't really, make that music, as it were.
I mean, I think that that's a valid read, but I look at more as like the gold violin to him is the Cadillac. It's the Rothko painting. It's the lighter. It's the possession. It's the skin that he wears that he uses to hide who he really is. And I don't know if the episode is really going any further than that, just because I think what really cinches it for me is the way that the episode starts and the way the episode ends really bookend that thought really well. And obviously what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like that is his MO. He does have that insecurity of like, am I good enough? Who am I? And all of that. But if anything, I think Maiden Form to me was a little bit closer to that read, where that was really about like our undergarments, our black and white personalities. And this, I think, is like the other side of that coin in a sense.
Well, it's funny that you kind of mentioned like all these different episodes, because I was going to say earlier that since you hadn't read the Matt Zollreis article this time, do you want to guess what word he used to describe this episode?
What word he used to describe this episode? Carousel? I don't know.
No, I mean, it's an adjective.
I don't know. You're going to have to tell me.
Okay.
Metaphorical.
He said this is the first superfluous episode of Mad Men.
Superfluous?
Which I find really fascinating. Because like you said, I think there's like, obviously it's like returning to a lot of themes, and like there's kind of these divergent storylines. It's like A plot and B plot and C plot and even sort of a D plot going on here. But I feel like they all kind of emotionally kind of connect together. And even there's an even sort of lyrical quality to them that I feel is very true to Mad Men. But I found it fascinating that he felt it was like all these kind of, all these different adject pieces that didn't quite connect together in a harmonious way.
Oh, I vehemently disagree with that. I think that these episodes connect like a beautiful golden symphony. But
sure. I'm more with you on this, to be clear. That's why I found it fascinating that like when I was reading, because I was expecting him to be more open and charitable with the episode, but he was like pretty critical of it, and I was surprised.
Yeah, that's surprising for me to hear, because I mean, even the Jane stuff, I think the Jane and Joan that entire segment is so rooted in how people use other people like possessions. They use them as gateways to wealth and power. It ties directly into the Jimmy stuff. And I think that that's what makes the contrast between all of those, like Dawn using Betty and Jane using Roger in order to keep her job. It's so different in a specific way to the way that Sal and Ken don't use each other. They just have a genuine connection. And I think I was getting at this earlier, but Brian Batt has said that he doesn't even think that this is necessarily like a pining, like, oh, he wants to get it on with Ken. If anything, it's more of like an adolescent sort of crush, where like a man crush that I think for Sal, he would obviously like act upon over time or something. But like, it's more of he is connecting with somebody who seems to get him, and Ken is reacting to that because Ken is a guy who's getting shut down by Jane left and right. Good for him, honestly, dodging that bullet and whatnot. But Ken is actually seeing like Sal isn't jealous of him, of being an artist. He respects him. He seems to validate his creativity and is encouraging. And this is like news to Ken. And a lot of the times over this series, Will, you said to me, I don't get how you could like Ken Cosgrove. He's a hound. Sure. He's
a bit of a chode, I think I've said before.
We can fix him, Will. I keep trying to tell you.
He's got a sensitive soul. I will give you that. But yeah, no, I found the budding bromance of this episode to be kind kind of sweet. And it's bittersweet, I guess. I'm not sure if it's going to play out later or if it's going to be kind of a standoff little thing that's in this episode.
You're not aware of the spinoff where Ken and Sal get married and move to Vermont? So. And
oh man, that'd be. I would gladly watch it, but yeah, I'm not familiar with this show. Yeah, but no, I mean, I think
yeah.
To your point, yeah, I do think when Sal says like he understands the piece, I think it's sincere. Like I don't think it's him just like saying that to be flirtatious or to like get into Ken's pants. Like I think he does kind of understand the desire that Ken has, like that need to express himself, but in this kind of constrained field. And that's kind of key too, is like the idea of finding art in this kind of capitalistic empire, like the idea of like seeing this, beautiful new age painting in this very, admittedly new age room, but in a very corporate office, in a very, business focused place. And this idea that like, yeah, there's this idea too, where Bert's kind of like this odd duck, being someone who is kind of more of a free spirit in this business world, but he is kind of remote and he is, very business conscious too. And that's something that kind of fuels him in his way. But yeah, he has that very artistic minded personality, something that I think Don has to some extent as well, but something that he kind of restricts or feels like afraid to express. Like he's almost sort of embarrassed when he goes to see movies and stuff.
Well,
and
the Don of him is more of like the Burt Cooper, right? The mystique, the sort of like, I'm just in it to win it. The Dick Whitman in him is the artist, the person who has that trauma and pain from his past and uses it to create art, right? And that to me is the compelling sympathy of this tragic character.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's so crucial to his character, is that in order to have that true emotion, he has to be himself, but he cannot allow himself to be himself because inherently he'd be an imposter, even though that would be...
He could be Batman for all himself, we know, right?
Yeah. I guess so. But I mean, yeah, it's just like there's the irony there of just like in order to be himself, he can't be himself. And in order to not be himself, he has to be himself. So it's like, yeah, this like contradiction and this irony to his character.
And we should mention too that I think that this is one of those episodes where even the camera movements, I've noticed season 2 levels this up a lot, but there's such good storytelling happening here with just what the camera chooses to focus on. I love the entire sequence where Ken and Sal and Kitty are together, because at the end of it, right, the payoff is that Kitty tells Sal, like, I feel invisible. I feel like I was trying to insert myself and she feels excluded. And I think sometimes people watch it and are like, well, what are you talking about? You were there. Like, Sal wasn't mean to you. He wasn't bullying you. But if you're really paying close attention to the scene, you'll notice that there are these like extended moments of gesturing where it's just characters drinking something and the camera will literally switch from Ken to Sal, then back to Ken, then back to Sal. And it does this over and over again. And you only see maybe like Kitty's hand coming out of the frame, right? So if you're really paying close attention to it, if you're just experiencing it, you notice that her feelings are extremely validated. Obviously, people watch it too and are like, oh, this is a doomed marriage because obviously Sal... he's a homosexual, and so he's not going to obviously be the kind of husband that I think Kitty wants necessarily, but obviously he's trying to replicate that, and obviously he can't do it in a subconscious way, right? This sort of thing is going to happen, and I think that's why he's so contrite, because he's like, shoot, I let it slip.
Right. But I mean, in spite of that, like the irony there too is that like he is technically in a healthier marriage than most of the other characters in the show as far as we've seen. Like he is emotionally available, like he does care.
Cleans up the kitchen,
cleans up the kitchen, like he's providing in an emotional way as well as like financially. But yeah, it's just like that, that doomed tragedy there, where it's like he does, like you said, care for Kitty, but he can't be there for her in the true sense because he has to. He's playing someone else. He's has a facade to make this marriage work, and subsequently, that's doomed to fail in some way or another. Another
intro that I considered doing for this episode, I thought about being all, Mike isn't here, so we won't be able to talk to him. I'm glad we don't live in the olden days when he was on the show. That was too mean. I love Sally's delivery of that line. Also, if you notice her playing checkers, she's not playing checkers, right? It's kind of like the pinochle thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think doesn't Don even say something about that? Like at one point, it's just like what are you doing? And like kind of calling
he's
her
like,
out. For...
You want to play checkers instead of my look at the clouds game,
right? I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you did kind of bring up Jane. I don't want to kind of short change that because I think there is some interesting things to explore there.
Controversial character. People really don't like Jane. They're not
really.
People look at Jane and they're like, she's a pain.
Do you think she's more controversial than Bobby and Jimmy?
Less controversial than them, but definitely like one of those season 2 characters. People are like, I don't like her. She's mean. Joan should have won this whole conflict.
Because I was going to ask, like, is this... Are we going to see those 3 characters after this? Because there is a sense of at least somewhat finality for like Jimmy and Bobby.
It's been a guess.
Okay. But I don't know. I mean, they extended their welcome farther than I expected. And subsequently, I wasn't really sure how long Jane was supposed to be a part of the season, if she's supposed to be kind of a key factor of just someone that's like, you know, kind of in and out. And obviously there was sort of an out for her in some respects here. And then they kind of move away from that in this episode. So I guess I'm asking you questions.
I mean, I'm not going to give anything away, Mr. Will. I mean, I'm not just going to tell you. I'm interested that you have this in your mind.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
people don't like Jane. She's petulant.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, there is something, like you were kind of alluding to the idea that like who gets invited into the room and like how they get invited. And like this idea of like that Don, even though he's like among the elite, like he doesn't feel like he belongs there, whether it's that party or the idea of like him being in that meeting with Roger and Bert. And then there's, Jane, who is like leading the brigade to go into Bert's office. And like, like,
I like how he's like, it's like we're skinny dipping.
Yeah. And yeah, like they kind of treat this office as if it's like some sort of like, taboo center, which I guess it sort of is, but like, like that Jane of all people, like I felt like it was almost sort of surprising when she did that, because I felt like from what we were seeing her before, she didn't really have that initiative in her. Like she seemed kind of more complacent, I guess, when she was in the office, and so I was a little taken surprised by her like gun-ho desire to be like, yes, let's go into Bert's office, let's do this. And I don't know, did you feel a little kind of brash?
No, she's getting comfortable, right? She's starting to feel a little bit secure in her job. I think that's why we see that whole scene where she's letting Roger flirt with her in a way that she doesn't let other characters flirt with her.
Sure.
Because I think she's starting to feel like, all right, I kind of got this really important guy obviously in my corner. I kind of got him wrapped around my finger, like that kind of thing. And I think that's why she kind of reacts the way she does when Joan is sort of reprimanding her, right? And she's like, You're not my mother.
Yeah, there it is.
I'm 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what I find fascinating. There's like, in this episode, at least, there's a sort of like entitlement from her that we haven't quite seen from her before, where she feels like this kind of like, she's not only amongst the group, but she feels like she's owed something more than she's been given, and is
Who
willing.
Does that remind you of, Mr. Will? Who does that remind you of from this episode? Somebody we haven't talked about much at all.
Pete Campbell.
That's right, Duck Phillips.
Yeah, Duck Phillips.
But yeah, Duck in this episode, he is somebody who feels like he deserves more than he's getting. There's the whole thing you even mentioned, who gets invited into the room. Jane invites herself into Cooper's office, but who doesn't get invited into Cooper's office? That would be Duck, when Cooper invites Don Draper, right? Gives him the whole speech. You're going to be wearing your tuxedo a lot more, like that whole thing. And Duck obviously has that look on his face of like, I've been working Martinson Coffee. I've been obviously
just
putting in work in, right? He went bird watching with the guy.
Yeah, I think just Martinson. They said they changed.
That's what I'm saying.
Name. Yeah. But I
said
think
Martinsons.
They dropped.
I said Martinsons, and then I was like, no, it's Martinson.
Right. There you go.
I said it. You just didn't hear it. You heard what you wanted to hear, that's for sure. But yeah, no, Duck doesn't get credit for the Martinson thing at all. Don does. And the way that Duck kind of looks at him, you know who else it reminds me of? This is why this episode is good. Reminds me of Jimmy Barrett. I've been standing behind guys like that my whole life. And you can see the resentment that Duck has for Don, the resentment that Jimmy has for Don. It's the image that Don projects. That's why it makes him so uncomfortable, because he's like, I'm not really that guy. I'm just kind of putting it on. But honestly, he is that guy too.
And that's something I also wanted to ask you about, which is that Jimmy is sort of infatuated with Betty in this episode.
Yes.
In a way that I felt like when they were flirting in that previous episode, was that the Benefactor, where they were kind of flirting, having that little like romantic, back and forth. It struck me as more kind of like impulsive. Like it just like he, like in that episode, I didn't get the sense that he was like in love with Betty. Like it was just kind of more just like, hey,
Bobby says that for Dawn to work Jimmy has to think he has a shot with your wife. That's what she says.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess, for me, I just felt like, is that crush that he's kind of developing on her more driven by his like instant infatuation with her, or more that he like sees Dawn with Bobby, and like, even though like he doesn't really seem like he had that much like jealousy for Bobby's previous, I mean, we haven't really seen Bobby's previous lovers so far as we can tell, but it didn't seem like he had that jealousy. But we're also kind of going off of what Bobby said, and so there could have been some burning resentment that we just didn't see.
She has kids, and it's kind of I think it's subtly implied that they're not Jimmy's, but he says it in the episode. What he's trying to do here is he is trying to have power over Dawn in the way he thinks he can. He used Dawn in order to get the show, and all along, I think his whole thing is he knows that he knows that Dawn and Bobby are doing what they're doing. I think there have been hints about this over the course of the season. I think when Dawn leaves her tied up in the hotel room, that probably confirmed it. But
well, also that the episode when Jimmy goes to confront Dawn, he has like the arm in the sling too.
Exactly. And I think this is Jimmy's way of using women as in a materialistic way, as a way for power to get back at Dawn, because he has a grudge against people like Dawn. And I think him being able to cuckold Dawn is his way of kind of just satisfying his own ego, honestly. And I think that he even kind of senses that when he's like, if you want to step out, fine. Don't do it with another man's wife. He was trying to do that. He's obviously a hypocrite. He's trying to sort of get his revenge in that way. But I think that ultimately is what ties to this episode. That's why I'm confused why the other site said it's superfluous. Does he mean, because like, I don't see how this episode could be looked at as redundant or filler or anything. It really drives the plot forward.
Well, you'll have to
he tells Betty.
Sure.
I'm just curious what his thinking is there, because this is such a pivotal moment when obviously like the look on Betty's face when Jimmy tells her like, oh, what do you think happened between them? Because there's this moment where it's clear to me that he kind of figures out like, okay, I'm not going to be able to sleep with Betty. Like she's not really kind of receiving my advances. And I think he's smart enough to realize, well, if I can't get with her, I'm going to mess up his marriage. Right. And I think that's kind of his thinking there. Is he's like, all right, mutually assured destruction, because he doesn't care, what happens with him and Bobby as much.
Oh, yeah. And I think he feels that they're kind of more secure, I guess. Like they just have this kind of weird understanding with one another. But yeah, I mean, it also is like, I think he even alludes to the idea that like he would only be in that room because of his comedy. Like the idea that like his motor mouth is like the one power that he has. And whether he's going to use it for good or for ill, he's going to use it to push himself up the social stratosphere, or to stick it to people that are, directly interfering with his personal and professional life. But yeah, no, I mean,
a lesser show would have had when Betty's just like, I don't like what you're saying. He should have been like, take it from the nut.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think there's other examples that like too, like I feel like going back to the Sal Kitty thing, like a lesser show would have had, Sal be more kind of resentful of Kitty, or like, maybe being more like cold and alien with her. But like, it's clear that they have like a very emotional relationship. It's just not a very physical or, sexual one, so far as we can tell. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think as far as the Betty Dawn stuff is concerned, I really do love that this last scene is the way it is, and just the idea of her, throwing up symbolically means that she's like kind of ruining the new car smell, kind of like, destroying this like kind of image that Dawn has been trying to create but knows is kind of a lie in some ways. And yeah, no, I think that's all fun. I also just think it's always good to end on a good puke joke.
It's a nice little zinger at the end, especially when earlier in the episode, right? She's like, hey, want to take it for around the block? And he's just like, not in the car. It's like, bro,
sure,
come on.
But yeah.
Great episode.
Yeah,
I think that it's just one of those ones where I just think everything's working really well. The script is super tight. It's just quite good. I really like
the script is tight.
Yeah,
I think it's good. I feel like it's like a little like as much as I like the episode, I feel like the script is kind of like, because there's 4 writers involved, and Weiner's one of them, and it kind of feels like maybe this was one of those. I don't know how they write the show, but I did kind of get the sense this was one where it's like they had, like when they map out the season, there's like things they want to do with certain characters. And this one kind of felt like, okay, like this is our time to do this, and this. Like, here's our moment to kind of do a little bit more of Sal. Here's some time we can do with Jane. And it's like, how can we kind of put all these things together? And they had this umbrella with like the imposter syndrome and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, we can all kind of fit these little eggs in this basket in this episode. And I don't think it makes it super tight, but I think it makes it very compelling in a thematic way.
I think it makes it super tight because I think they did it really well. And obviously lots of episodes of Mad Men are designed that way, right? And it's one of those episodes where I think that it has both setups and payoffs, which I always appreciate. I like those episodes because I don't like it when it's all setup. I don't love it when it's all payoff. I like it when there's a nice balance between the two. And so that's why I think that it's just like, it's really well-rounded. Maybe that's like kind of more what I'm getting at. It has like a little bit of everything that I personally like about the show. So I think it's one of the stronger ones this season. Did you have thoughts though, Will, on the woman at the beginning? Because, like who's that?
Oh, who she was?
Yeah, what are you thinking?
I mean, my initial guess is that it is the real Don Draper's wife or widow, or like a sister, okay, or like maybe like a cousin or something, like someone, or like maybe a close friend, like someone that knew Don intimately and like saw that like, hey, John Draper is selling, cars at this dealership and stuff. She's like, could it be my Don's back? And, I mean,
I'm writing down what you're saying. Yeah, I'm writing down Will's guess. She is close to the real Don Draper. That's your guess.
Or it could have just been like a classmate or something that like knew that, or had heard, like hadn't seen Don in a while and like, wanted to check that out. I did like that to make John Hamm look younger. They just poofed his hair up instead of like slicking it back.
Yeah, it's
like kind of, yeah.
I think it's funny that in your eyes that she, a classmate of Don Draper, would try to find him. Man, that must be close classmates, man.
Yeah, this would be the 50s, so I don't know. Maybe things were different back then. I don't know what they were like.
All right, well, I just wanted to make sure we kept a record of your guesses, predictions, and whatnot. Any other thoughts before we go to trivia?
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't know if I feel like there's something we didn't discuss, like something that happened, like a key thing that happened here that we kind of brushed over.
We didn't talk about the jingle as much. I mean, I talked about it at the very beginning.
Yeah,
but I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Like, yeah, it ties into the whole episode. It's like, oh, we don't want to be talked to. If you're going to sell us something, it has to be a mood of feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that kind of ties to Jane stuff too, where it's like this younger guard of, a new generation coming in from the 60s, kind of like feeling like they have a way of doing it that's different. Certainly like Jane kind of feels like she's a little bit more entitled to what she's gotten than her status is at this point. And obviously that's the case with Pete, though he isn't in this episode as much, which is kind of fascinating. But I mean, I don't know if I have much more to add to that whole thing other than that. I did like that Peggy seemed a little kind of enthusiastic about it. I was kind of expecting her to be like annoyed or like thinking this is kind of like beneath their status, but she seemed kind of into it, which is fun.
Yeah, that seems like Peggy to me. It stays with you. I think that she likes a good tune. We saw her dance the twist. She has fun with music. It's a way to Peggy's heart. Okay, let's do trivia here. Not a lot for this episode, just a couple things. The Rothko painting, which by the way, I think that it's funny when Sal says, "Why? Oh, it's a Rothko. Why didn't Dale say that?" Because Dale doesn't know that. Sal, come on. Because it's Dale. Like, he doesn't even know how to tie his shoes. But anyway, Cooper says he spent $10,000, or I think Harry Crane, somebody said that it was $10,000. And so in today's numbers, that's a lot. That's getting close to almost like $90,000 for a painting. What do you think of that, Will? A $90,000 painting. Would you go there? Would you do it?
I mean, I can't. I don't have that means to do that if I wanted to.
Also, okay, so this episode won an Emmy, can't talk, for outstanding hairstyling for a single camera series, which is interesting.
Because of Don's poofed up hair?
That was
They gave him an Emmy. Whoa! Who's this young buckshot? Oh, it's the same guy. I'll be dilly
John
darn dang.
Hamm? Impossible.
Give them an Emmy. Gosh dang.
Yeah, it was an instant Emmy. Also, okay, this is a fun one. When Don is pitching Martinson Coffee on their new campaign, he references how there have been previous attempts for coffee companies to appeal to the youth market using puppets and so forth. So a lot of people have speculated that this is a reference to when Jim Henson, before he, of course, would go on to do the Muppets, Sesame Street, and all of that, he did a series of commercials for a coffee-based company, or a DC-based coffee company called Wilkins Coffee. So 2 early versions of the Muppets were used to sell the product. And yeah, I know that it's one of those like weird time capsules. If you look up those commercials, they're very, very surprisingly modern for 1950s era advertising. I recommend looking into it. And the last thing I have here, you have something?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was gonna say, I don't know if I've seen those ones, but I definitely have seen some of the more kind of avant-garde stuff that Jim Henson did prior to the Muppets, and it's a trip. I mean, I definitely would recommend it. They're all, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them are on YouTube, and well worth a time capsule to explore those little piece of oddities. Agreed.
I mean, maybe one day people will look at the podcast that we have done. It's like, man, before John and Will, started that children's broadcasting company on PBS, they were talking about movies and TV shows. Whoa, what a time capsule. Okay. Last piece of trivia here. The group that the Students for a Democratic Society that Kurt brings up, right? He said he wrote. Oh yeah, okay. So the group, the Students for a Democratic Society, that is referenced by Kurt and Smith, wrote the original Port Huron statement, which was referenced in The Big Lebowski. So I wasn't sure if you caught that. You're a fan.
Literally, I was just about to mention that. I was pulling up a note about it because I was looking up things I forgot to talk about. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Because I was going to say, because they were reading from the first, not the second draft of the statement, to quote The Big Lebowski, or paraphrase it.
Yes.
But I was delighted by that.
It's such a great inclusion in the episode too, an episode that's all about the hollowness of advertising and consumerism. So yeah, nice little addition there.
But also like the idea of like taking something artistic and meaningful and applying it to consumerism and capitalism.
Yes.
So.
Well, that's what I think. That's what I think helps the show sort of like maintain its credibility, because sometimes people watch it and I think they misinterpret it, or they have their own interpretation, whatever you want to say, of, oh, the show is glorifying this sort of thing and not really poking holes at it, which I think is nonsense. I think the show is extremely critical of the American dream and consumerism and materialism. I don't even think it's under the surface. I think that most of the time it's like right there, like overt. It's not subtext. It's just the text of the show that this whole rampant consumerism is just killing these characters.
Right. Which I always find fascinating, like the idea that this was on a station that had commercials. So just like, I can't imagine like what it's like.
That's the thing. That's what people will just kind of like, their surface level thing. It's just like, oh, this show is problematic because like it's the kind of person who says something is romanticizing something if it depicts it. Right.
Sure. But no, just the idea of just like how cynical it is about this capitalistic idea of advertisement. And then like you'd get like an ad for like Swiffer wipes or something. And it's just like,
well, there were moments when the show would literally they would show ads on AMC that were in the Mad Men like format. So
really?
like they would, and you wouldn't even know it was a commercial at first. It would be like two characters in the break room talking about like, oh my gosh, this new Dove soap. And then you realize, oh, we're in a commercial break. It just sort of like, it transitioned from the show into a Mad Men commercial with the same like characters. They did it a bunch of times.
Oh, that's
And so,
fascinating. That's cool.
yeah, when I first learned of the show was that way, because I was aware of the show, but the first time I ever started to like experience it at all was when we were learning about this stuff. And this is when I was in college. And so like we had advertising classes, and when we saw this at one of those ads first, I think it was Dove. That was like the first thing I ever saw from Mad Men, actually.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
And
it was that and the carousel pitch. Those was the two big things.
Yeah. And you saw that and you're like, one day I'm going to have a podcast with some guy
You'll see.
named Will Ashton and Mike Overhost and talk all about this show.
That's right. That's right. And you guys were still in Pampers diapers at that point. Sorry. All right. Well, that'll do it for Mad Men. We miss Mike Overholst. We can't wait to have him back. We'll drag him to the show, kicking and screaming if we have to. But no, he's just really sick, and so hopefully he recovers soon.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going on with him, but I hope he gets better. I hope he's on the mend.
I hope it's not the show that's making him sick, right?
No, maybe not. I don't know. You've been jealous because Mike and I have been having our own separate conversations about the White Lotus, which is going on now.
You're having
obviously.
real Sal and Ken moments over there talking about White
exactly.
Lotus.
Yeah,
So I'm kidding. Being like, am I invisible? Do you even see me, Will Vitor?
Right. But yeah, no, I mean, you're more than welcome to watch the show. I mean, at the time we are recording this, the season 2 finale is going to drop a few days from now, but
I don't have time. We're in the middle of voting for Critics' Choice. I have to watch as much as I can because we're doing nominations. So I'm in movie mode.
You have priorities. I get it.
It's so passive aggressive. It's like, you care about other things besides me. That's what it is.
Sure,
yeah.
I get it. No, I get it. I get it.
All right, well, we'll be back for next week's episode of Mad Men. Thank you as always for listening. And on to the next pitch.
All right.